If you've got your Bibles, please do turn back to Exodus. We've taken quite a long section of Exodus. We're not going to be able to focus into all the details. We're going to look at some of the things that we see through chapters, the end of 20 right through to 24 of Exodus. We do have it open as we go along. But let me lead us in prayer once again. Heavenly Father, we do thank you for your word. But we thank you that in all of the scriptures we see Jesus. And we pray that as we come to these words, which may seem archaic and distant, that we might see more of him. And that might be an encouragement and help to our faith. For we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. I wonder, did you know that this is still a law, that it's actually illegal to enter the Houses of Parliament wearing armour? Did you know that? So you're not allowed. So if you're going on a visit to London and you're thinking about wearing armour into the Houses of Parliament, don't do it. It's against the law. Or I think this what is a true law. I'm slightly scared about it. Apparently in York, between Monday and Saturday, if you see a Scotsman with a bow and arrow, you're allowed to shoot them. And that's an okay thing to do. And so I'm going to always make sure if I ever go to York, I'm not going to take my bow and arrow with me. You know, there's loads of, when you actually start looking and kind of Googling archaic laws, there's loads of laws in our country. Some of them have been kind of repealed and they're not kind of standing. Other ones, they're just there. The law kind of stands. And you think, how on earth does that, what's the point of that? Why was that law ever enacted? What was the point of it? And sometimes I think that's the kind of feeling that we can have as we come to the law of God in the Old Testament. We're looking at Exodus 20, end of 20 to 24, but they go right the way through Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy as well. The laws of God. They seem to us archaic, unintelligible. We wonder what the relevance there is for our lives now. And what I hope this morning is that we will see that they are relevant for our lives today, even if some of them don't apply in quite the same way. Now, as we get into this, let me remind you of where we are in the book of Exodus. Do you remember we saw at the beginning of the book of Exodus, God saves his people from Egypt, and he brings them to Mount Sinai. And so in chapter 19 that we looked at last week, the people have arrived at Mount Sinai, and God has introduced the covenant he is going to make with them. The first and important step that God says was he says, I have brought you to myself. Remember we said that last week? God has brought his people to himself. He has saved them. And so then as we see the laws which come after, we don't think of them as a ladder by which we are to reach God. God's laws are not a ladder by which we are to reach God. Rather they are, and God has brought us, and now this is an expression of what it means to be in relationship with him. But being in relationship with God, being brought to him, did bring the people certain responsibilities. Living God's way demonstrated that they were God's people, his treasured possession. Living God's way would mean they would become that nation of priests, honouring God in the nation and being a light to the world. They would be a holy nation, distinct from those around. There's one commentator who puts it this way, I quite like how he summarised it. Obedience to God lies at the heart of the covenant relationship. However, obedience by itself does not create the special covenant relation. Rather, it is a loving response to what God in his grace has done first. And what obedience looks like in Exodus is set out in two sets of obligations. The first is the Ten Commandments in chapter 20, announced directly by God to the people, God speaking to the people and speaking these, what comes to be known as the 10 words, or sometimes you'll hear the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments. 10 words that will be written by God on stone tablets. The second set of obligations is what we're considering this morning, and it's been called the Book of the Covenant. These are words spoken by God to Moses, and Moses then speaks these words to the people, and Moses also writes these down on paper. And we read that in chapter 24. But within this book of the covenant, we find a variety of different kinds of laws. Now, some of the laws are general in nature. We read some of those in the passage Mike read for us in chapter 23. Gerard, you can pick that up. Do not show favouritism to a poor person in a lawsuit. It's a general principle, a general law. But then in verse 6 it is balanced by, do not deny justice to your poor people in their lawsuits. It's a general thing, general in nature. Others of the law would be described more as a case law, describing a real situation in life and what the response should be. So listen to this from chapter 22, verse 6. If a fire breaks out and spreads into thorn bushes so it burns sheaves of standing corn or the whole field, the one who started the fire must make restitution. It's a case law, it's a real situation which describes what might have happened and then what the response should be. And as you read through chapters 21 to 24, you will see a variety of those general laws, case laws. And as you read through, you'll find things which you wholeheartedly want to follow and think they are good principles for life, even if they are sometimes ignored in our society. There is verse 1 of chapter 23, do not spread false reports. Do not help a guilty person by being a malicious witness. That's good, isn't it? We would want to follow that. And yet other times there's other laws which we struggle to see the significance of and the relevance for us today. So Mike read in chapter 23 verse 19, do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. And you think, well, I've never thought about boiling a young goat in its mother's milk. Why is that here? What's the relevance for that? You can ask me about that one later if you want. So there's things that we struggle to see the relevance of. But then there's also things that we struggle to find the reason of why would this have even been included by God in his laws? And so if you look at chapter 21, you'll see the first heading there is Hebrew servants. Some of the older translations had this as Hebrew slaves. And we think, servants, slaves? How could this be in God's law? Or again in chapter 21, verse 17, anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death. And you think, how does that? What does that mean? You see, as we look through this book of the covenant, it's sometimes difficult to understand and to see the relevance for our lives today. But I hope that as we go through, we might see some of the ways in which it does. To take a step back for a moment, you could divide, I think there's a picture here, you could divide the book of covenant up like this. At the end of chapter 20, there's laws about worship. So there's stuff about idols and the altar, how you build the altar, and how you to walk up to the altar, what you to wear on the altar. Verses 21 to 22, chapters 21 to 22, there's stuff about social responsibility. So you've got the freedom and servitude for Hebrew servants. There's stuff about humans injuring other humans. There's stuff about various injuries which involve animals. There's matters concerning property. And then that's followed by a section which is a mixture of things about worship and social responsibility. And so there's stuff about sorceresses, bestiality, false sacrifices, stuff about oppression and loans, of offerings and firstborns and holiness, of testimony in courts, of an enemy's animals, of oppression, and then back to the Sabbath and festivals and worship again. So there's a mixture of things which go on there. Chapter 19, the preparation for the covenant. Chapter 20, the first set of commandments. Chapters 21 to 23, the book of the covenant. And then at the end of chapter 23 into 24, there is a ratification of the covenant. There's a ceremony which we'll look at the end this morning. And so what I hope that we'll do this morning is to look at this book of the covenant and think, how does it apply to us now? And how does the New Testament see it? And then do the same thing with the covenant ratification in chapter 24. How are we to understand this book of the covenant? That's next screen. Yeah, the Book of the Covenant. Now, what are we to make of these laws? What are we to make of this? And as you continue, if you continue to read through into Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, you would see laws continue. What are we to make of them? Well, firstly, I think there's two responses which I think seem wrong. On the first hand, there are people who say this law, it just doesn't apply now to Christians. And so we can dismiss it. We didn't really need to have this talk this morning. We could have got on to something else. It doesn't apply as New Testament Christians. We can just forget about it. But that doesn't do justice to Jesus' words in Matthew 5. I've put them on the screen here if you need to look it up. Jesus says this, the Sermon on the Mount, "Do not think I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter nor the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven." We can't just dismiss and say it doesn't apply. On the other hand, there's people who say, well, we need to follow these laws in their entirety without variance. And again, I think that is the wrong response. Because these are historically conditioned sets of rules which governed the life of the Israelites at this time and in their promised land when they were a nation distinct from all others around. As Jesus says, nothing disappears until everything is accomplished, but there is the possibility of some things being fulfilled and accomplished. Okay, so how do we understand? Well, I think first, as we come to these words, we have to realise that these are words, laws, which demonstrate God's character. They're not just random, rather they reveal God to us. They tell us what God is like. So think about some of the things we see. As you go through these laws, you see that time and again there is a concern for people. So think about the laws about being a servant here. I said a few weeks ago when we looked at 1 Corinthians, the kind of laws in the kind of about slavery here, about servanthood here, they're not like the 17th century where people were kidnapped and taken forcibly to another place. That's condemned even in Exodus. If you look at chapter 21, verse 16, anyone who kidnaps someone is to be put to death, whether the victim has been sold or is still in the kidnapper's possession. Do you see what's going on there? Somebody was kidnapping someone and they may well have sold them to someone else as a slave. That is condemned. The context of Exodus and these laws about Hebrew servants, this is probably somebody who's got into financial difficulty. And they've got themselves into a real pickle and they can't live now, because they've got no ways to make money, to live their life. And so they might sell themselves as a servant in someone else's household. It's a way for them to be provided for, cared for, to provide board and lodgings and then provide their work for their master. But look at how God puts it in verse 2 of chapter 21. See, if you buy a Hebrew servant, that's someone who comes and offers themselves and you bring them into your service, you buy them, he is to serve you for 6 years, but in the 7th he shall go free without paying anything. You see what God is doing here? Here's a provision for people to be cared for, but it's not a lifelong binding thing, 6 years, and then you can go free without any payment. God is concerned for the care of people. And as you go through, you see that there is a concern that all are treated fairly, whether that is a man or a woman or a foreigner or a widow or the fatherless or the vulnerable. All the vulnerable are to be cared for within this society. And so in chapter 22, verse 21, you read this: "Do not ill-treat or oppress a foreigner, for you were foreigners in Egypt. Do not take advantage of the widow or the fatherless. If you do, and they cry out to me, I will certainly hear their cry. My anger will be aroused, and I will kill you with the sword. Your wives will become widows, and your children fatherless." You see, God's care and concern is for those who are vulnerable in society. It says, I will protect them, I will avenge them. It shows us what God is like. And you see that all the way through. God's character is revealed through these laws. Secondly, we have to see that the Book of the Covenant, I've said this a little bit earlier, is historical, with a historical context. It's about the creation of the nations, about how their life will be governed when they get into the promised land. And so just as some of the laws in our nation reflect a certain time in our history, and we're conditioned by that history, so some of these laws are conditioned by their history. They express true morality, they express who God is, but they were for that time. And so the principle of what we see here may follow on, but we might not need to follow the exact law as it's put here, about cooking a young goat in its mother's milk, for example. And we also have to realise that Israel is different to what Great Britain is. Israel was meant to be a theocratic nation. God was their king of the whole nation. And they were to be distinct from every other nation around. That's not modern day Great Britain. We are not like that. God is king of the whole world, but he's not king of the nation in that same sense. He's king of the church and of his people and how we function as God's people. So we see that these laws, they demonstrate God, they reveal God's character, they have a historical context. But thirdly, one of the things we see as we go through here is that they unify life. As you go through, there's no division between the sacred and the secular. Have you heard that? Sometimes people say that you've got Monday to Saturday, and then you've got Sunday, and they're kind of different spheres of life. But the law here is all mixed up. It's no accident as you look through the laws that it begins with things about idols, about the altar, and about how you worship God there. And it's no accident that it finishes with rules about religious festivals and how to celebrate them. The laws about social responsibility are bound by those religious laws. But then they're also interwoven throughout. As you go through, you'll see that there's laws about everyday, daily life and laws about religious life, all mixed up. And it stresses to us that there's no aspect of our life which is not of a concern to God. All of life is lived under God and for him and in obedience to him. Fourthly, I think the laws, as you go through, you see that many of the laws, particularly the case laws, they prescribe a consequence for not keeping the law. Which is not really surprising, is it? If you do something wrong, break the law, you would expect there to be a sanction that the law brings. And these are no different. But the striking thing in these laws, and you can see it when you compare them to others of the time, I'm told, is that the consequences prescribed by God here show a remarkable restraint and proportionality. And so read through, you see the principle in verse 24 of chapter 21. So 21 and 24. You see, if there's a serious injury, you're to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. You see, if there's a serious injury, the response, the sanction is to be proportionate to what has been done. You see, yes, there's going to be judgment, there's going to be retribution, but it is in proportion to the crime. It's so important, isn't it? It's not that I think, oh, well, Dave, you've given me a bruise on my arm, so I'm going to break your leg. It's you give me a bruise, I'll give you a bruise back. There's a proportionality towards it. Secondly, as you go through, it's not just retribution that's there, but there's also compensation that would be given. There's restitution for wrong done. But again, it is proportional. You see it in verse 1, if you look down the page that we're on into chapter 22. Whoever steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it must pay back 5 head of cattle for the ox and 4 sheep for the sheep. You see, again, it's proportional. It's not, you've stolen my sheep and slaughtered it, therefore you have to give me 1,000 sheep. It's you need to give me 4. There is a restitution, a way to make it right. And it's proportional. So there's retribution, there's restitution. There is also an acknowledgement that there is different types of culpability. It's different if something is an accident or whether something was premeditated. Or it was something which would have been reasonably expected that we could have done something about. So for example, look at verse 28 of chapter 21. If a bull gores a man or woman to death, the bull is to be stoned to death and its meat must not be eaten. But the owner of the bull will not be held responsible. It's an accident. If, however, the bull has had the habit of goring and the owner has been warned but has not kept it penned up, and it kills a man or a woman, the bull is to be stoned and its owner is to be put to death. Can you see what's going on here? The man, he has been irresponsible in his civic duty. And so therefore his culpability is greater than if it was just an accident. You see, there's an expectation not just that we keep the laws, but that we are responsible in how we do things. And that God will hold us responsible for those things. And those principles underlie, don't they, our view of justice in this country. And that's a good thing. But listen to this paragraph from one commentator. They write, but the laws in Exodus tell us much more than the kind of justice we might hope to establish in contemporary society. They tell us the kind of justice which we can expect on the day when Jesus sits on his judgment throne and all the nations gather before him. There we will see retributive, proportionate sentences and the assessment of culpability perfectly combined. He will render to each one according to his works. You see, this is what God's judgment of his world will be like. And it actually starts to bring to see what the real problem here. The real problem with these chapters is not our understanding of what God is saying. Our real problem is in keeping them. As we read these laws, we will see ways in which we do not actually keep them and see that we stand culpable before God. And as you come to the New Testament, I think what you see is that first things get worse. Turn with me, if you will, keep a finger back in Exodus, but turn to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5 is page 969 in the church Bibles. This is Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus is kind of gathered the people and they're sitting and he is teaching them. And in a way he is giving the law again. He is telling the people how they are to live. And there's a pattern that goes all the way through it. Where Jesus says, you have heard it said, and then he refers to something in the Old Testament. But then he says, but I tell you. And then he adds something. So look, for example, at verse 21. You have heard it said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, it's an Aramaic term of contempt, is answerable to the court. Anyone who says, "You fool," will be in danger of the fire of hell. You see, the law says, do not murder. In a sense, it's restraining our desires maybe to do the wrong thing. But what Jesus is saying, actually, that might have restricted and regulated behaviour, but there's a bigger principle going on here. And that is that in our hearts we should love our neighbour as ourselves. And so when we have those feelings of anger and hate towards our brothers and sisters, that is bad and wrong and will incur judgment. See, Jesus is saying actually the law, what it does is it actually points to a heart problem. Yes, we might be able to keep the outward things, but in our hearts often there is something more going on. What we need is a heart change. I'll turn over the page in Matthew, again chapter 5, just turn over a page, verse 38. Now Jesus says, "You have heard it, that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you." You see, it's the principle we saw before, isn't it? Proportionality, restraint. But Jesus says, actually, there's a bigger principle. It wasn't, no, Dave's given me a bruise and I must now give him a bruise back. Actually, the principle was teaching us that we should have a willingness to show mercy and grace, and to be willing to be slighted for others. The law, in a sense, is bigger than just the laws that we read. There's a trajectory and a principle that should that is fulfilled by Jesus. Jesus summarized the law. So we looked at in our All In. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. Which is quite something, isn't it? And love your neighbour as yourself. You see, the law shows us that actually we've got a long way before we fulfill what God would want for us. We need a heart change. You see, the problem as we listen to Jesus, as we read the law, is not understanding what it says, but it's in doing it, in keeping it. Which is why one of the responses we should have here is humility. And is coming to God to ask for his help. Because by ourselves we can't keep this. Even when we see it's good, we still fail. Turn back and just very more briefly, we're going to look at the covenant ratification. Well, that was good. I had a page in the Bible and I just pulled it out before I turned back. Anyway, Exodus 24. You see, these laws have all been part of God's covenant. He's been making this a relationship with the people. He's saying, well, I've saved you. This is what now it looks like to follow me. This is the kind of responsibility, the obligations of following me. And in chapter 24, we have that ratified. So we see in verse 3, Moses went and told the people all the words and laws, all of the Lord's words and laws. They responded with one voice, everything the Lord has said we will do. Moses then wrote down everything the Lord had said. It's interesting, isn't it? You know, that they've heard all of this. They've heard the Ten Commandments, the words of God. Moses has been teaching them the book of the covenant. He writes that down. And then if you look across to verse 7, Moses takes the book of the covenant and reads it to the people again. I think it just shows us, isn't it, that we need to hear God's word regularly, repeatedly, And what follows is the covenant. The people say, we will do it all. They accept the covenant. They accept the responsibilities. And then there's the ritual which happens. Look at verse 24, chapter 24, verse 4. Moses, as he got up early the next morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and set up 12 stone pillars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. Then he sent young Israelites men, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed young bulls as fellowship offerings to the Lord. Moses took half the blood and put it in bowls, and the other half he splashed against the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it to the people. They responded, we will do everything the Lord has says. We will obey. Moses then took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, this is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words. It's quite a confronting little passage, isn't it? The relationship here with God is defined by sacrifice. The young men, they bring these young bulls and sacrifice them as burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. Moses collects the blood. Half he throws against the altar, and the other half he sprinkles the people with. As he throws it against the altar was the symbolic presence of God. And he's saying it takes blood for this relationship to be maintained and restored and to be enacted. The relationship with God is established by blood. To be in relationship with God required the sacrifice of blood. It required blood so they could be forgiven. And the people say, we'll do everything God says, and the blood is then sprinkled on the people. You can't quite imagine what that'd be like, can you? A gory picture, but it gets at the seriousness of what being in relationship with God is like. You see, the people have entered into this relationship. This is marking them out as God's people. But the sacrifice, I think, is also saying this. If you break this covenant, then you deserve what happened to these animals. It's a serious thing to be in relationship with God. God has created the way. By this blood, He has given them a sign of mercy so they can be in relationship with God. He gives them provision so sins can be forgiven. As you go through, you see there's a whole sacrificial system so that sins could be forgiven and relationship maintained. See, it comes back to what I said before. The problem is not so much with understanding the law, but with keeping it. And the problem comes because we can keep it. The law is even bigger than we thought. Jesus says your righteousness would need to exceed that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, the best of the best. Your righteousness needs to exceed theirs to be able to enter the kingdom of heaven. We see God's character. He is utterly holy. He gives us His laws. And it seems like, how can we possibly live up to it? How could we possibly keep in relationship with God? Well, God gave them the sacrificial system. He gave them these rituals. But it was only ever a shadow of what was to come. The greater reality was that Jesus was going to come and offer His blood so that we might be in relationship with God, so we might be washed clean, and so that the blood of His death might give us access to God. You see, this is only ever a shadow of what was to come with Jesus. We'll finish with this, but turn to Hebrews chapter 9. We've not got long to spend on this. There's lots more that we could say here, but look at Hebrews chapter 9, page 1207 in the Church Bible, 1207. This section comes in a larger argument, but look at verse 19, 1207, Hebrews chapter 9. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 19. When Moses had proclaimed every commandment of the law to all the people, he took the blood of calves together with water, scarlet wool, and branches of hyssop, and sprinkled the scroll on all the people. And he said, "This is the blood of the covenant which God has commanded you to keep." So he's picking up from what we just read in Exodus 24. In the same way, he sprinkled with blood both the tabernacle and everything used in its ceremonies. In fact, the law requires that nearly everything be cleansed with blood, and without the shedding of blood there is no forgiveness. See, the writer's picking up on these incidents and saying that the blood was required, the shedding of blood was required so there could be forgiveness. And it happened time and again. And it happened again, and it happened again, and it happened again. And that was with the earthly and the temporary. How much more was needed for the heavenly and the spiritual and the eternal? But look what the writer goes on to say. Verse 23. It was necessary then for the copies of the heavenly things to be purified with these sacrifices, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. For Christ did not enter a sanctuary made with human hands, it was only a copy of the true one. He entered heaven itself, now to appear for us in God's presence. Nor did he enter heaven to offer himself again and again, the way the high priest enters the most holy place every year with the blood that is not his own. Otherwise Christ would have had to suffer many times since the creation of the world. But he has appeared once for all at the culmination of the ages to do away with sin by the sacrifice of himself. Just as people are destined to die once and after that to face judgment, so Christ was sacrificed once to take away the sins of many. And he will appear a second time, not to bear sin, but to bring salvation to those who are waiting for him. Jesus entered into heaven, and he took with him his blood, his sacrifice, that he made once for all. He doesn't do it again, so that we might have forgiveness. And he will come again to bring full salvation for us. See, the wonderful thing is we read the law and we think, how on earth can I keep this? How can I possibly be in relationship with God? And we see that Jesus did everything for us to be forgiven. And the law shows us God's character. It shows us how we should live under God. It shows us that we require a heart change. It shows us that we can't fully keep it. And yet it also shows us how we should live. And so I think in the Christian life there's a pattern that keeps on going, isn't there? Wake up in the morning and say, thank you, Lord, for this new day. Help me to live for you. Help me to love you with all my heart, soul, mind and strength, and to love my neighbour as myself. And then in the evening you get to bed and say, Father, I've failed again. Thank you for Jesus who died for me. And the next morning you wake up and say, thank you for the new day. Help me to... And then we say, I'm sorry. We have a great confidence, but a pattern of life to live. Let me pray. Our Heavenly Father, we come to these words in Exodus and they seem hard and difficult, and yet we see that they reveal you to us. They show us that we fail time and again. But thank you for Jesus who died for us, the one who kept it perfectly, so that we might be forgiven. And would you transform us now so that we might be your people, living under your rule, showing your world, your light. For we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Your work is life to all.